Well, good evening, Bern, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi Lockdown Lecture Series. This is meeting number 54. It is 1 week away from our anniversary lecture, and more of that later on this evening, Bern. As usual, can I welcome you all along here this evening, and for those who are out in the sun today, I hope you enjoyed your daily piece of exercise. And I think we all saw that we're beginning to get some good news on the evening news, both north and south of the border, that we may get some sort of route map out of this pandemic, and hopefully the heads of our orders will be able to take that into consideration when they meet in June. Bern, as usual, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines? Please ensure that your video remains on. Send me a little message, Bern, if you've got bandwidth challenges and you need to switch it off. And please have a name that is recognisable and understandable within the little box. That would be very much appreciated. Can I also invite you to sign our virtual tile on our Facebook pages? You all know what this is for, so we've got a little bit of history and it keeps Nobby busy during the lockdown. Thank you, Bren. Bren, this evening, it's a great pleasure to welcome worshipful brother Gary Smith to join us. I came across Gary through the Internet Lodge and I witnessed him give this presentation. This is actually going to be the last time he gives this presentation, as he's been promoted within his own province to Provincial Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies, which we congratulate Gary on, and that's in the province of West Lancashire. Gary's a pad brat, Bern. He was born and raised in Germany, as his father was a serving member of the Royal Artillery, and he was educated at Collingwood Army Education School. And at the age of 12, he went on a day school outing to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. That, Bern, had quite a profound effect on him, and I'm sure we'll see and hear more of that effect this evening. Gary joined Freemasonry in 2007 and has presented several papers to a variety of Masonic audiences. The first one was to mark the celebrations of the 100 years of the armistice. He was also researched a member of his own lodge, Peace number 2269, Brother William Thomas Hemmings, who was killed in action during the First World War and received the military medal for bravery. Gives me the greatest of pleasure to introduce Gary. He's got a young and youthful assistant this evening, Bern, to help with the PowerPoint. And for those who can't keep up with the banter, that is me. So I'm going to try and share my screen and the presentation. Okay. Is that showing full screen, Bern? If someone can just give me a...
Perfect, Gordon. Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay. Worshipful brother Gary Smith, the virtual floor is yours, sir.
Good evening, brethren. As Gordon has already stated, this evening is to be the last time that I make this presentation, because hopefully we can get back to some kind of normality for the beginning of the next season, September. And I'm going to be very busy, as he's already alluded. I'm a Provincial Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies, so it's very, very busy, and you're out with all the bigwigs, etc. So the research is taken a little bit of a back burner. However, I was very lucky to have been invited to UGLE to present this paper last week, which was to be my swan song, but Gordon had asked me previous to that, and I agreed to do this. And I'm very, very pleased to do so, brethren. And it's great to see 93 participants here. So following on from the UGLE one, where I think there was around 900, this is the second largest audience I've had for this paper. So I do hope you enjoy it. It does cover a dark period of Freemasonry. And it covers a period that really not a great deal of Freemasons know a lot about, and I'll allude to some of that in the presentation and why that is. But first of all, just a very, very brief synopsis of me, really. As said earlier, I was born in Germany and I was raised by my mother and father. My father was in the Royal Artillery, but when I was very young, I used to collect cap badges, and I remember the three favourite badges that I had in my collection was an SAS wing dagger, which I was given to by one of my father's best friends. Funnily enough, all I knew him was Uncle Jock. He was Scottish, so it's resonant with you lot. But yeah, he was a serving SAS soldier, and he'd given me the SAS wing dagger, and along with that, I had a United States Airborne cap badge. But the third one that was my favourite was a skull and crossbones, and I had no idea what it was. I knew that it was a German army badge, but I didn't have any idea where it was from. And it was one of my favourites. These were my favourite three, and I actually remember, brethren, that I used to wear this stitched onto a leather waistcoat when I was playing pirates with my friends. I had absolutely no idea what this badge was, only that I thought it was very cool. And at 11 and 12 years old, that's how I felt. However, soon the Holocaust, etc., came into the curriculum, and we did a visit to Bergen-Belsen, and I became aware of exactly what that cap badge was. And I remember coming home from that visit, getting in the cap badge collection, taking that particular one out and throwing it as far as I possibly could into a local lake, where hopefully it still lies now and will never be discovered again. So as I say, it did have a profound effect on me. If you leap forward about 35 years, I was the research chairman of the Research Society in Chorley and Leyland. And I was given a paper by a guy who's actually on here tonight, Mike Monroe. I was given a paper on Freemasonry and the Holocaust, and it was a subject that I didn't know very much about. So I thought, I need to know a little bit more about this. So that paper gave me the kick up the backside to go out and do my own research. And that's the research paper that you're going to receive tonight. So before I do start the paper, I must acknowledge that I've used previous lectures, publications, and internet sources when putting together this presentation, a full list of which is available on request, along with any suggested points of references, including books and films, which are available for further study, should anyone be interested in doing so. I'm quite happy to give Gordon permission to share this paper with any of you. So, sit back and enjoy, etc. But if there's anything that you miss or that you want to go back yourselves, I'm giving Gordon express permission to send it out to any of you. And I'm quite happy for any of you to go on and present this paper to your own lodges, etc. A final point is that since presenting it to UGLE, I was contacted by a member of Quarter Coronati, who also has a paper quite similar, although they kind of cross over on some of the themes. His is more about Hitler, etc., but it does cross over. And he's raised a couple of subjects in my paper, and I've raised a couple in his that, although they're not wrong by any stretch of imagination, but there's a little bit more that could be added. So as I get to those parts, they're not actually in the text, Gordon, but as I get to those parts, I might just bring you up to speed with any of those developments. So, brethren, without any further ado, if you sit back, make yourselves comfortable, and I'll begin. The news that Britain was once more at war with Germany was broken by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain at 11:15 a.m. on Sunday, the 3rd of September, 1939. The British Expeditionary Force, commanded by General Lord Gort, had begun arriving in France on the 9th of September, 1939. Following rapid German victories, which led to the fall of France and British forces being withdrawn during the Dunkirk evacuation, Hitler then ordered a directive on the 16th of July that German forces would invade Britain under the code name Operation Sea Lion. The plan for a successful invasion was detailed in the book Invasion 1940, otherwise known as the Black Book, which listed approximately 2,820 British residents identified in advance for immediate arrest and to seize property and documentation in respect of the major enemies of the Reich, Freemasons and Jews. Thankfully, Hitler indefinitely postponed the invasion on the 17th of September 1940. The Black Book was a more detailed version of the briefing handbook that was produced by SS General Walter Schellenberg. Schellenberg was born in Saarbrücken, Germany in 1910, but moved with his family to Luxembourg when the French occupation of the Saar Basin after the First World War triggered an economic crisis in the Weimar Republic. Schellenberg returned to Germany to attend university, first at the University of Marburg, and then in 1929, the University of Bonn. He initially studied medicine, but soon switched to law, and after graduating, joined the SS in May 1933. He met Reinhard Heydrich, and they went to work in the counterintelligence department of the SS, otherwise known as the SD. From 1939 to 1942, he was Heinrich Himmler's personal aide and a deputy chief to the Reich Main Security Office under Heydrich, who answered only to Himmler. In addition, Himmler bestowed upon Schellenberg a unique position beyond that of simple aide, making him his special plenipotentiary. Since Himmler held the position of general plenipotentiary to the whole Reich's administration, this then gave Schellenberg enormous influence within Nazi Germany. He also arranged many other plots of subterfuge and intelligence gathering, including the bugging of Salon Kitty, which was a high-class Berlin brothel. He eventually became the head of the combined intelligence services of the SD and the Wehrmacht. At the Nuremberg trials, he was acquitted on the crime of genocide, but found guilty of complicity in the murder of Soviet prisoners of war. Sentenced to 6 years, he was released in 1951. Within the text of the 20,000 copies of his handbook, which were to be the reference Bible for the invasion 1940, the section on Freemasonry starts, "England is the country of Freemasonry." It goes on to assert, "Freemasonry is thus an invisibly effective political instrument for the internal structure of Great Britain and its empire and for British imperialism." To put these plans for England and action in occupied countries into context, it's necessary to go back in history. Nick Cohen, writing in The Observer in January 2006, stated that it was Masons and not Jews who were the target of the original conspiracy theory of the far right. What would end up as fascism had begun as a reaction against the American and French revolutions. The counter-revolutionaries had to explain why people were proclaiming heretical ideas about the rights of man. They couldn't, without compromising their stance, admit that the French and the Americans were embracing Enlightenment values of their own. There had to be a conspiracy. Europe's Jews were in the ghettos in the 1790s, and it was preposterous to pretend that they were the secret rulers of the world. So the far right decided the conspirators must be Freemasons. Historically, Freemasonry had begun admitting Jews as members in the mid-18th century, first in England and then later in the Netherlands, France, Germany, and other countries. Nevertheless, European Freemasons at the time tended to be very cautious about who they allowed to join their organization. In some countries and in some locations, Masons allowed Jews to join their lodges. Other countries, however, and other lodges took deliberate steps to reject Jews from becoming members. The anti-Semitism that some Jews experienced while trying to join fraternal lodges was one reason for the creation of the Jewish fraternal organizations such as B'nai B'rith. German Jews founded the Berlin branch in 1885. Prior to the First World War, many Germans had felt that Freemasonry was an organization not just infiltrated by the Jews, but dominated by them. Such was the belief of Theodor Frisch, who founded the Reichshammerbund, or Reichshammer League, in 1912, which was the German anti-Semitic movement based on the Hammer, a journal founded by Frisch in 1902. A year after the end of the First World War in 1919, the retired army officer, Muller von Hausen, together with Frisch, attacked international Freemasonry and alleged that it was dominated by Jews. It was a bestseller and maintained that Jews and Freemasons were responsible for Germany's defeat in 1918. This had followed on from the bitterness of General Erich Ludendorff, who had been the virtual master of Germany's destinies until 1918, and who had taken part in the Beer Hall Push on the 8th of November 1923, which was a failed coup attempt by the Nazi party leader, Adolf Hitler, along with other Battle League fighting party leaders, to seize power in Munich, Bavaria. About 2,000 men had marched to the center of Munich, where they confronted the police, and this resulted in the death of 16 Nazis and 4 policemen. Hitler himself was wounded. The plot having failed, in the trial that followed, Ludendorff was acquitted. In 1924, he was elected to the Reichstag as a representative of the NSFB, a coalition of the German Völkisch Freedom Party and members of the Nazi Party, serving until 1928. The historian Margaret Lavinia Anderson notes that after the war, Ludendorff had wanted Germany to go to war against all of Europe, and that he became a pagan worshipper of the Nordic god Odin. He detested not only Judaism, but also Christianity, which he regarded as a weakening force. Right up to his death, Ludendorff devoted himself wholly to propaganda intended to prove that the war, the ensuing German revolution and most of the world ills had been the doing of the Masons. 2 days after the failed plot, Adolf Hitler was arrested and charged with treason. From Hitler's perspective, there were 3 positive benefits from the attempt to seize power unlawfully. Firstly, the push brought Hitler to the attention of the German nation and generated front-page headlines in newspapers around the world. His arrest was followed by a 24-day trial, which was widely publicized and gave Hitler a platform to preach his nationalistic sentiment upon the nation. He was found guilty of treason and sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison. Secondly, Hitler used his time in prison to produce Mein Kampf, which was dictated to his fellow prisoner, Rudolf Hess. In chapter 11 of Mein Kampf, Hitler asserts that Jews used the principles of freedom expounded by Masonry to strengthen their political position. The third and final benefit to Hitler was the realization that revolution and anarchy was not the right path to power. This instead must be through legitimate means. Accordingly, the most significant outcome of the push was a decision by Hitler to change National Socialist German Workers' Party tactics, which would demand an increasing reliance on the development of Nazi propaganda. And on the 20th of December 1924, having served only 9 months, Hitler was released. But what of the rest of Europe? As well as Hitler, both Benito Mussolini and Francisco Franco also inaugurated their reigns with outrages against Freemasonry, and it seems they never relaxed their respective persecutions of the craft. In 1924, Mussolini decreed that every member of the Fascist Party who was a Freemason must abandon one or the other organization, and in the summer of 1925, Mussolini officially dissolved Italian Freemasonry. During 1925 to 1927, black shirt hooligans looted the homes of well-known Freemasons in Milan, Florence, and other cities, and murdered at least 100 of them. General Luigi Capello, who was one of the most prominent fascists at the time and had previously held the post of Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Orient, gave up membership in fascism rather than betray his Masonic ideals. He paid dearly for this loyalty. Less than a year later, he was charged with complicity in an attempt on Mussolini's life and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In 1925, Spain's first dictator, General Primo de Rivera, ordered the abolition of Freemasonry in his country. Then the rebellion of 1936 caused a civil war, and in the territories held by General Franco, Freemasons and trade unionists were arrested and executed. Some researchers claim that a large percentage of the 75,000 death toll of this conflict were Freemasons. In 1937, General Francisco Franco claimed that Freemasonry, with all its international influence, is the organization responsible for the political ruin of Spain. When Franco consolidated power in 1939, all of Freemasonry was banned. In 1979, 4 years after his death, bans on Freemasonry were declared unconstitutional, and several Grand Lodges and Orients now flourish in Spain. In Germany, during the period just after the First World War, most Masonic lodges and their members were affiliated with the 3 Grand Lodges located in Prussia, and known collectively as the Old Prussian Grand Lodges. These Grand Lodges deliberately excluded non-Christians from membership, and by 1922, they accounted for 70% of all Masons in Germany and numbered around 47,000 men. 6 other Grand Lodges in Germany were known as Humanitarian Lodges because they accepted Jewish and Muslim males as well as Christians. Thus, a German Jew had to apply to a Humanitarian Lodge if he wanted to have any chance of joining a German Masonic Lodge. In 1928, the Humanitarian Lodges had 24,000 members, and less than 3,000 of these were Jewish. When Hitler gained power in 1933, all lodges except the 3 Prussian Grand Lodges, which barred Jews, were forced into self-dissolution. The Enabling Act was passed by the Reichstag in March 1933. Using the Act, on January the 8th, 1934, the German Ministry of the Interior ordered the disbandment of Freemasonry and the confiscation of property and all other lodges. Consistently considered an ideological foe of Nazism in their world perception, Special sections of the security service and later the Reich Security Main Office were established to deal with Freemasonry. In a speech delivered at Essen on the 5th of August, Dr. Wilhelm Frick, the Reich Minister of the Interior, declared, "It is inappropriate that a secret society with obscure aims should continue to exist in the Third Reich. It is high time that Freemasons' lodges should disappear in Germany, just as they have in Italy. If this is not realized in Masonic circles, I will soon help them in this direction." It was not until May 1935 that the Reich and Prussian Ministry of the Interior ordered the immediate dissolution of the 3 remaining lodges. It declared that all Masonic lodges had engaged in subversive acts against the state and confiscated all lodge property. Many prominent dignitaries and members of the order who did not give up their membership were sent to concentration camps. The Gestapo seized membership lists of Grand Lodges and looted libraries and collections of Masonic objects. Much of this Masonic loot went on to form the basis of Goebbels' Anti-Masonic Expedition, held in Munich in 1937. It even included completely furnished Masonic temples. The Nazi Party ordered the words Freemason and Lodge to be discontinued and international Masonic relations to cease. Many former lodge members holding positions in the civil service were forced or harassed into retirement. They were also barred from holding positions within the military and the Nazi Party. In 1934, Adolf Eichmann, who had been a member of the youth section of Austrian Hermann Hitler's right-wing movement, after being expelled from Austria following the banning of the Nazi Party in 1933, made the decision to return to Germany. Eichmann, who by this time was a member of the SS, was shortly promoted to SS Scharführer, or squad leader, which is the equivalent to corporal. His battalion of the Deutschland Regiment was quartered at barracks next door to Dachau concentration camp. To escape the monotony of military training and service at Dachau, Eichmann requested transfer to the SD. This transfer was accepted, and he was assigned to the sub-office on Freemasons, organizing seized ritual objects for a proposed museum and creating a card index of German Freemasons and Masonic organizations. He prepared an anti-Masonic exhibition, which proved to be extremely popular. Visitors included Hermann Göring, Heinrich Himmler, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and Baron Leopold von Maldenstein. Maldenstein invited Eichmann to join his Jewish department of the SD at its Berlin headquarters, and Eichmann's transfer was granted in November 1934. Throughout the war, Eichmann's ferocity saw him rise through the ranks, eventually becoming a lieutenant colonel in the Gestapo. He was present at the Wannsee Conference and became one of the major organizers of the final solution. Following the war, he fled like so many of the Nazi war criminals to South America. In 1960, he was captured by the Mossad and brought to Israel to face trial for his war crimes. He was convicted on 15 counts and sentenced to death, and was hanged on the 31st of May 1962 at Ramla prison. And he remains to this day Israel's only judicial execution. During the 1930s, as a result of observing the action of the Nazis, British Freemasonry ceased to be open. It had previously advertised its meetings, and public parades in full regalia were common. As we are all too aware, the veil drawn down at this time still remains to be fully lifted. Meanwhile, the Axis powers were making inroads into English society in the form of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists and Spencer Lease's Imperial Fascist League. Both of these organizations produced anti-Masonic and anti-Jewish propaganda, as well as supplying intelligence to the Nazis in Germany. Mosley, who after the death of his first wife, Cynthia, in 1933, had secretly married his mistress, Diana Guinness, in Germany on the 6th of October 1936 at the Berlin home of Germany's Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. Adolf Hitler was their guest of honor. Mosley spent large amounts on his private fortune on the British Union of Fascists and tried to establish it on a firm financial footing by various means, including an attempt to negotiate through Diana with Hitler for permission to broadcast commercial radio to Britain from Germany. Mosley died on the 3rd of December 1980. and his body was cremated in a ceremony held at Le Père Lachaise Cemetery, Orsay. Throughout the 1930s, Ulrich Fleischhauer, who was a leading publisher of anti-Semitic news articles reporting on a perceived Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory for world domination, further expanded his propaganda efforts by organizing the Pan-Aryan Anti-Jewish Union and a series of international anti-Semitic congresses to actively push for the suppression of Freemasonry and combat the alleged Jewish conspiracy for world domination. He went on to encourage the deportation of Jews from within Europe through mandatory resettlement in southern Africa, as was envisioned by the Nazi-promoted Madagascar Plan. This plan was to deport all of Europe's Jews to the island of Madagascar, which lies on the east of Africa. The military government of pre-World War II Japan also attacked Freemasonry, and these views were expressed by a Japanese representative who attended the Valdez Congress, hosted in 1938 by Fleischhauer. On behalf of Imperial Japan, he stated that Judeo-Masonry is forcing the Chinese to turn China into a spearhead for an attack on Japan, and thereby forcing Japan to defend herself against this threat. Japan is not at war with China, but with Freemasonry, represented by General Chiang Kai-shek, who was the chairman of the national government of the Republic of China, the successor of his master, the Freemason Sun Yat-sen. In all Japanese-controlled territories, Freemasons' lodges were closed, buildings destroyed, and if it was possible, the Freemasons were even more brutally treated than other prisoners of war. Deprivation, hunger, disease, torture, and executions were common. Despite this, in 1942, 47 Masons met in the infamous Chiang Kai jail in Singapore, with a multitude of assistant tilers to warn of any approaching Japanese soldiers. As Nazi Germany prepared for war in 1938, the regime relaxed pressure on the former members of the dissolved lodges. Hitler, realizing that the success of his political and military aims in some way rested on the shoulders of the most influential members of German society, who had been former members of Freemasonry, allowed members of the rank and file who renounced their former loyalties to once again find employment within the military and civil service. And in April 1938, efforts were made in the public sector to decide on continued employment of former lodge members on a case-to-case basis. Many civil servants who had been forced to retire due to their Masonic connections were recalled into service after the war began, and the ban on former Masons serving in the Wehrmacht, even to the officer rank, was relaxed. The Nazi Party continued to ban former Freemasons from membership, though exceptions were made after 1938 in both the Nazi Party and even the SS. Later, following this relaxed view on Germany's former Freemasons, Hitler himself appointed a Freemason, Hallemeyer Schacht, who had been a member of the fraternity for 30 years, into a position which aided the regime, first as president of the Reichsbank and then as the Minister of Economics. When Austria succumbed in March 1938 to the power of the Reich, this persecution against Freemasons continued. The masters of various Vienna lodges were immediately arrested and deported to some of the most notorious concentration camps, including Dachau. In Czechoslovakia, the same procedure was repeated when Nazi troops simply occupied Bohemia and Moravia, making them a protectorate of the Reich. When in September 1939, Nazi forces overran most of Western and Central Poland, Soviet troops invaded Poland from the east. During the occupation of the country, Nazi forces pursued a policy of systematic extermination of the Polish people, particularly Jews and Freemasons, many of whom perished at concentration camps scattered around the country. This next slide shows a poster which would have been displayed at concentration camps throughout Europe. And the following slide is an English translation of the poster. If we could get that next slide, please, Gordon. There you go. As you can see, brethren, if you go from the left-hand column across, you have political enemies, habitual criminals, immigrants, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay males, asocials, and Roma and Sinti. It's quite interesting to note that actual lesbians were not treated in the same way as gay men by the Nazis, and they wore a black triangle, which was classed as asocials, or they were in with the Roma and the Sinti, which are the gypsy people. Freemasons were forced originally to wear a green triangle, which was habitual criminals, but that was quickly changed within a matter of months, really, to make us political enemies. So we had to wear a red triangle. So as you can see in the left-hand column, Freemasons would have been warned to wear the downward-facing red triangle. If you were a Jewish member of the fraternity, if you go 4 down on the left column, then you would have worn a Star of David with the red triangle and the yellow triangle on the background. So they were very systematic in the way that people could be recognized within these camps by the staff who ran them, so that immediately on looking at the sleeve of the uniform or the clothing that you would wear, sometimes rags, they would instantly be able to tell which background, etc., that you came from. The United Grand Lodge of England suspended all Masonic meetings in September of 1939 in response to the national emergency. However, this was relaxed the following month, and meetings were resumed under special directions. In December of that year, the quarterly communications of Grand Lodge allowed meetings to resume, but requested that all members of enemy nationality or birth should temporarily withdraw in the interests of harmony. The Netherlands were attacked in May 1940, and immediately Nazi forces started to liquidate the Order of Freemasons. Buildings, archives, and funds were confiscated, and private Masonic belongings of brethren were requisitioned. Temples were literally destroyed, with archives and libraries being sent to Germany. Buildings and furniture were sold by public auction. The Grand Master was taken to Germany and died only 3 months later in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. For Belgium, the Nazis had compiled over 2,000 dossiers on Belgian Freemasons in preparation for their invasion. On the completion, they immediately ordered the dissolution of Masonic lodges, and a total of 179 crates of books, works of art, and Masonic furniture was seized and shipped to Germany. Shortly after the defeat of the Norwegian army in June 1940, the dissolution of Masonic lodges was the first action on the agenda of Major Vidkun Johnson Quisling. Quisling was a Norwegian military officer, politician, and collaborator whose right-wing National Rally Party nominally headed the government of Norway during the occupation of the country by Nazi Germany during World War II. Also in June 1940, France signed an armistice with the Nazis, and the puppet Vichy government, under the regime of Marshal Philippe Pétain, caused the 2 Masonic bodies of France, the Grand Orient and the Grand Lodge, to be dissolved, whilst at the same time seizing their property and later selling it at auction. German-occupied Paris hosted an anti-Masonic exhibition in October 1940, as did German-occupied Brussels in February 41, displaying Masonic ritual and cultural artifacts stolen from lodges, such as exhibitions aimed to ridicule and direct hatred towards Freemasons and to heighten fears of a Jewish Masonic conspiracy. German wartime propaganda, particularly in the army, charged that Jews and Masons had provoked World War II and were responsible for the policies of the United States President Franklin Roosevelt, who was identified as a Freemason. Freemasonry Today published an article by Dr. Keith Dooney in April 2002 concerning the very active role of Freemasons in the French resistance. The first active member of the resistance to be shot by German authorities was a Freemason. In the mid-1930s, Professor Bernard Fay of the Collège de France and director of the National Library, who was educated at Harvard, authored books which saw him regarded as a Masonic critic. He progressed during the occupation of France to an anti-Masonic activist, credited with the death and suffering of many Freemasons during World War II. He was a very active collaborator, and after the war, he was tried and convicted by a court of justice in Paris. This is one of those occasions where I've learned of something new about Fay. He was actually given a presidential pardon by the Premier of France not long after. So he only served a few years, and then he was given a pardon, and he lived out the rest of his life quite happily. So a little bit of injustice there, really. That's going to be added to this paper, because that was a fact that I was made aware of quite recently. Despite a plea from the prosecution that he received the death penalty, the court was lenient and sentenced him to imprisonment and hard labour for life, the confiscation of all his property, and national degradation. When he was interrogated by the court, he told them, "I was glad to have in my hands the instrument capable of renovating the country. My mission was to organise a service for the detection of Freemasons and Masonic archives. To be successful in that work, I was obligated to have relations with the Germans." In May 1947, the Philalethes magazine, which is the Journal of Independent Masonic Research in North America, reported that the bureau of which Fay was the head had prepared a card index containing 60,000 names. Lists of names of Masons were released to the official gazette of the Vichy government for publication, and many Catholic papers copied these lists in order to boycott and publicly shame the brethren so listed. Hunted down and persecuted for the sole reason that they belonged to the Masonic fraternity, 989 Masons were sent to Germany, and 549 were executed by firing squads or perished in concentration camps. And again, brethren, there will be something else added to the talk, which is, it's a poster, or should I say a plaque, that is in France. I don't know the exact place where it is, but I will find that out. And it's actually a plaque that lists, it's in French, obviously, but I've seen the English translation of it, and it lists these numbers of who was deported, etc. And most of these were under the direct influence of Professor Bernard Fay. So he really did get off lightly, didn't he? In Greece, where both its King George II and Prime Minister, Ioannis Metaxas, were Freemasons, 21 days after their invasion in April 1941, the Nazis reached Athens, and one of the first actions was to go to the Masonic Hall. They confiscated the records which were left there and inflicted serious damage to the property. They then arrested the Grand Master, who was taken to prison, where he was kept under very harsh conditions, which caused irrevocable damage to his health. Although he was released some 7 months later, he never recovered, and he died in 1947. The island of Jersey in the Channel Islands, after a night of heavy bombing on the 29th of June 1940, was invaded by Nazi forces. Despite promises from the German commanders that Freemasons and Masonic property were not at risk, the Masonic temple was quickly ransacked, and Masonic property was either vandalized or shipped off to Germany for an anti-Masonic exhibition to be carried out in Berlin the following year. These actions did not go unnoticed. In February 1941, Sven G. London wrote an article in the American Mercury newspaper under the heading, "Nazis and Fascists are engaged in a ruthless campaign aiming at the annihilation of Freemasonry." These opening words were, "There is only one group of men whom the Nazis and Fascists hate more than the Jews. They are Freemasons." On the 3rd of October 1942, the Allied forces launched a small-scale raid on Sark, comprising 12 officers and men. 5 Germans were captured and bound. They attempted to escape, but a German officer and a private were killed, and another soldier captured. On hearing of this raid, Hitler ordered that all future captured commandos were to be shot. As another reprisal, Berlin ordered a further deportation of Channel Islanders, comprising specific categories of persons. On the 27th of September 1942, the German military commander of Western occupied Europe sent a telex to the High Command of the Wehrmacht. This document, headed secret, ordered that these deportees were to be drawn from specific categories of Channel Islanders, including Jews and high-ranking Freemasons and various other categories. Significantly, as far as the deportation of Jews was concerned, the telex stated that where the person were to be deported was the head of the family, then the whole family were also to be deported. Again, brethren, it's been brought to my light that no actual deportations took place because of, in regards to this telex. The Germans who were in control of Jersey at the time, they were quite friendly towards the people who lived on Jersey. So although they were under orders to start the process to make these deportations happen, it never actually happened. And towards the end of the war, learning about this friendliness that had risen from the German soldiers and the people on Jersey, they were replaced and they were all admonished, and some of them received heavy sentences. So the Germans were sent back to Germany and they were admonished for their actions, and they were then replaced. Plans were then put into place to deport. However, the end of the war was literally around the corner and it never actually happened. From these foregoing events, you can see that it's no surprise that many prominent Freemasons were included in the Schellenberg Handbook list of 2,820 people to be detained following the invasion of Britain. Also included was a directory of establishments and institutions, embassies, universities, newspaper offices, and Freemasons' lodges in which the Nazis were interested. It included all known British lodges.
Gary, can you unmute yourself again, please?
I have, yeah, I have. I'll just go back slightly. Also included was a directory of establishments and institutions, embassies, universities, newspaper offices, and Masonic lodges in which the Nazis were interested. It included all known British lodges, including Grand and Provincial lodges. The pattern here following a successful invasion would have undoubtedly followed that of the rest of Europe. However, in the United Kingdom, there was potentially an even greater problem for Masons. In 1799, English Freemasonry almost came to a halt. In the wake of the French Revolution, the Unlawful Societies Act banned any meetings of groups that required members to take an oath or obligation. The Grand Masters of the Premier Grand Lodge and the Ancient Grand Lodge, Prince Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, and Edward, Duke of Kent, both sons of George III, called on the Prime Minister William Pitt, who was not a Freemason, and explained to him how Freemasonry was a supporter of the law and lawfully constituted authority, and was much involved in charitable work. As a result, Freemasonry was specifically exempted from the terms of the Act, provided that each private lodge's secretary placed with the local clerk of the peace a list of the members of his lodge once a year. This continued until 1967, when the obligation of the provision was rescinded by Parliament. As part of their propaganda campaign against Freemasonry, the Nazis and other local right-wing organisations mounted anti-Masonic exhibitions throughout occupied Europe. The next several slides depict various propaganda images and video used by the Nazis, both in Germany and Nazi-occupied countries, aimed at raising public support against Freemasonry and linking it with Judaism. The first slide is a propaganda slide entitled Jewry, Freemasonry and Bolshevism, and it features a poisonous snake with bird fangs. This served as a title slide for part one of a lecture series produced by the leader of the SS, the Chief of Race and Settlement Main Office. And I think it's obvious, you know, the Jews are an enemy of the Reich, Freemasons are an enemy of the Reich, and Bolshevists are an enemy of the Reich. The second slide is an anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic display at the exhibition entitled The Eternal Jew. The exhibition sought to establish a link between Judaism and Freemasonry at Munich, Germany, November the 10th, 1937. And you can see, brethren, that it depicts a lodge room that we would all recognize some of the things within that poster. And the three people I would assume would be the master and his wardens, depicted as skeletons. And it's trying to make it look very macabre, isn't it? I mean, we all know that there's a bit of a relevance with the third degree ceremony within there. I won't go into details in case there's anybody that isn't a Master Mason yet. You know, we know that some of that has a resonance within our lodges in the third degree, but it's trying to make it look very suspicious and evil, really, isn't it? Slide 3 is a display entitled British Freemasonry. And this was an anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic exhibition in Berlin. And it clearly shows the Torah scroll and the picture of King Edward VII, Prince Albert, the Duke of Clarence, and Prince Arthur, the Duke of Connaught, all wearing Masonic regalia in March the 7th, 1941. Again, brethren, trying to link Judaism with Freemasonry in this exhibition, with the photo of the ruling king at the time and the Torah. The next slide is entitled The Relationship Between Jews and Freemasons. The text at the top of the slide reads, World Politics, World Revolution. The text at the bottom reads, Freemasonry as an international organization beholden to Jews. With the political aim of establishing Jewish domination through worldwide revolution. The poster shows where revolutions took place in Europe, from the French to the German, and was poster number 64, published in Stuttgart, Germany, 1935. I beg your pardon. The next slide was an anti-Jewish poster, which was issued in German-occupied Serbia in the fall of 1941 for the Grand Anti-Masonic Exhibition in Belgrade, October the 22nd, 1941 to January the 19th, 1942. It has a caricature of an evil-looking Jewish elderly man with a long beard that turns into snakes, with symbols for capitalism, communism, and Freemasonry. Beg your pardon, brethren. Just going to have a drink. Yeah, so you can see on the snake's head on the left, obviously on the head there, it's the square and compasses. The next slide is 4 stamps which were issued by the Serbian collaborationist authorities and were on display at the Grand Anti-Masonic Exhibition in Serbia. They depict Judaism as being the source of all evil in the world and portraying a strong and victorious Serbia, triumphing over the plot of world domination. An estimated 80,000 people, including the collaborationist leader Milan Nedic and some of his ministers, visited the exhibition prior to its closure in 1942. Obviously, the slide on the left, you know, we can see the Star of David's, but this guy is wearing a Masonic apron. So this black shrouded figure with the sword and the Star of David on his chest, he's also wearing a Masonic apron. The one on the right is it's a snake with the Star of David again, but its head is being forced down on the top of the globe with a square and compasses below it. The slide on the bottom left, I'm yet to find any Masonic reference on there. I think that is probably. It looks like it's anti-Christianity, really, but I haven't seen any anti-Masonic stuff on that one. But the slide at the bottom, the stamp at the bottom right, is obviously, you know, the relevance with the B and J. You know, we all understand the relevance with that one, and it's obviously a Russian gentleman stepping through and forcing them apart with the power that he has. The next slide is a white postcard and was available to purchase and is entitled The Exhibition in Logan Museum. This was issued to commemorate the 2-day September Anti-Masonic Exhibition at Chemnitz on September the 17th to the 18th, 1938, and it depicts a skull with a square and compasses laid upon an open Bible. Believe it or not, brethren, you can still purchase this, because when I was researching this paper, I came across sites that were selling it. So this is still available to buy. Slide 8 is a French film entitled Forces Occultes, or Occult Forces, and it recounts the life of a young member of parliament who joins Freemasons in order to relaunch his career. He thus learns of how the Freemasons are conspiring with the Jews and the Anglo-American nations to encourage France into a war against Germany. This film was commissioned in 1942 by the Propaganda Abteilung, which was a delegation of Nazi Germany's propaganda ministry within occupied France, by the ex-Mason Jean Mamet, and it sought to prove a Jewish Masonic plot. On France's liberation, its writer, Jean-Marc Rivière, its producer, Robert Musard, and the director, Jean Mamet, were purged for collaboration with the enemy. On the 25th of November 1945, Musard was condemned to 3 years in prison. Marx Rivière was condemned in his absence. He had gone into a self-imposed exile to death and degradation. And Mamet, who had also been a journalist on the collaborationist journal Al Pilori, and was thus condemned to death and executed at the fortress on Montreuil on the 29th of March, 1949. This movie is available on YouTube. So if anybody's interested in watching it, it's about 50 minutes long. It is interesting to watch, and to see just how the propaganda machine, it starts off all innocent with this guy wishing to join the Freemasons, and he's discussing it with his wife, and they're quite excited that he's going to join the Freemasons. However, when he joins, he uncovers a much more dark and deeper secret relating to the infiltration of Freemasonry by the Jews, and it goes on to assert that they are looking for world domination. It is interesting to watch, brethren. I would recommend it, and as I say, it's on YouTube. However, one of the most unexpected Masonic happenings during the war was that at least 3 lodges were actually formed in concentration camps. According to the April 2005 edition of MQ, other Masonic meetings, usually lodges of instruction, were held in prison of war camps in Europe and the Far East. On the 15th of November 1943, 7 Belgian Freemasons and resistance fighters had founded a Masonic lodge, the Loge Liberté Chérie, which is French for beloved liberty, inside Hut 6 of Emsland Lager 7, Lower Saxony, Germany. The name of the lodge was derived from La Marseillaise, and they later initiated, passed and raised another Belgian. Only one founder, Luc Sommerhausen, and the initiate, Fernand Erau, survived detention, and the lodge stopped working at the beginning of 1944. The survivors, Erau and Sommerhausen, met again in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and they remained inseparable from then on. In the spring of 1945, they were involved in the death marches, and although Erau was over 6 feet tall, on the 21st of May 1945, in the St. Pierre Hospital in Brussels, he weighed just over 5 stone. In August 1945, Sommerhausen sent a detailed report to the Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Belgium, in which he delineated the history of the lodge. He died in 1982 at the age of 79, and the last witness, Erau, died at the age of 83 in 1997. L'Obstinie was the second Masonic lodge that was founded in the Oflag XD camp by members of the Grand Orient of Belgium. Jean Ray, the orator of the lodge, became in 1967 the second president of the Grand Orient of Belgium, which recognized the lodge on the 14th of July 1946. The third lodge was La Frère Captifs de l'Ach, and whose register is now located in the Grand Orient of France Museum. In 1938, Hitler's own publishing house issued a volume on Freemasonry, its worldview, organization, and policies. The preface was written by Reinhard Heydrich, who at that time was the second in command of the Gestapo. Heydrich, who was a particular favorite of Hitler's closest circle and one of the main architects of the Holocaust, later chaired the January 1942 Wannsee Conference, which formalized plans for the final solution to the Jewish question, which ultimately prepared the plans for the deportation and genocide of all Jews in German-occupied Europe. Prior to this conference, the Jews were just to be deported from Germany to its satellite nations, but with direct orders from Hitler himself, Heydrich was given carte blanche over the deadly and horrific outcome of Europe's Jewish populations. He subsequently became head of the Reich Security Main Office. The organization's stated duty was to fight all enemies of the Reich, inside and outside the borders of Germany, which included Jews, Bolsheviks, Germans, Gypsies, and Freemasons. Again, brethren, just as a matter of interest, there are 2 really, really good movies about the Wannsee Conference. It doesn't cover the Masonic side of the thing, but it covers the final solution. They're very, very interesting and well worth a read to anyone with an interest in this period in time. One of them is called the Wannsee Conference and is a German film with English subtitles. And it's a very good movie in its own right. However, it's been remade by an English version starring Kenneth Branagh as Heydrich, Colin Firth stars, and a couple of others, Stanley Tucci. A lot of recognizable actors in it. And that's simply called Conspiracy. I think it was made in 2001. I'm not sure. It might have been a little bit later. But that's a really, really good film. You sit down to watch that and you watch it all the way through, and it's very, very strong. The message it sends across is very strong. I would recommend that all of you, if you haven't already seen one or both of those movies, to do so. Again, if anyone wants any information on any of the references and books and movies and things, my recommendations, then they can ask Gordon for that, and I'll send a full list out. Heydrich was assassinated in 1942 by the Czech army and exiled soldiers who were flown in by the Special Operation Executive. Their job was to wage a guerrilla-type warfare, as well as assisting resistance groups and partaking in espionage. The SOE were also known as the Baker Street Irregulars, Churchill's Secret Army, and the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The book itself was written by Dieter Schwarz and discloses that every new Nazi member must confirm by his word of honor that he does not belong to a Masonic lodge. In outlining the official Nazi view on the subject, it says, Nordic is the Nazi conception of the world, Jewish Oriental that of the Freemasons. In contrast to the anti-racial attitude of lodges, the Nazi attitude is race conscious. More importantly, it goes on, Masonic lodges are associations of men who, closely bound together in a union, employing symbolic usages, represent a supranational spiritual movement, the idea of humanity and the general association of mankind, without distinction of race, people, religion, social and political convictions. It's quite amazing that Freemasonry's basic ideals are expressed so clearly by its mortal enemies. It's quite clear from what happened in countries invaded by German forces that large numbers of European Freemasons perished during Nazi occupation, over and above the thousands who were killed by Mussolini and Franco. These exact numbers are very difficult to assess. However, it is estimated the number of Freemasons who died in the Holocaust to be between 70,000 and 200,000. After World War II, members of the Soviet forces found much of the Masonic material that had been taken by the Nazis. They transported it to archives in Russia and Poland, where the material remained unseen for more than 40 years. The Soviets, like the Nazis before them, wanted to learn about the fraternity because they too found Freemasonry threatening to their totalitarian government. With a thaw in American-Soviet relations and the end of the Cold War, and the eventual breakup of the Soviet Union, the US Holocaust Memorial has been in a unique position to collect material from archives of the former Soviet Union, Poland, and Romania, which were formerly closed to the West. The museum archives began to receive a wealth of information relating to the Holocaust, which numbers in excess of 1 million microfilm pages, many of which relate to the Nazi persecution of Freemasonry, including thousands of pages of reports by the German secret police, Gestapo, relating to the monitoring of Freemasons' activities in Germany and other countries. Investigations into and lists of the contents of Masonic lodges, archives, and libraries that were confiscated by the Nazis. Papers and publications compiled by various Nazi organizations that relate the threat they saw in Masonry, and lists of members of Masonic lodges from various Nazi-occupied countries. Brethren, this final slide depicts a memorial that was created to commemorate the 7 founder members of Lodge Liberté Chérie, which translates to Cherish Liberty. And again, brethren, I think we can all see the relevance of the arms crossed when we bring an entered apprentice into the craft. And we know that a song goes along with that, and we can see the relevance of that. And that's why that particular crossing of the arms was chosen for this memorial. Anyone who visits the Holocaust Memorial Museum will see that it contains a number of segments which relate to the Nazi persecution of Freemasonry. In the segment entitled Technology and Persecution, visitors can learn how the Nazis compiled and used information on their enemies. This segment's text states, all governments gather information about their citizens. The Nazi regime, however, used such information to track political opponents, enforce racial policies, and ultimately implement mass murder. As early as 1934, various government bureaus began to compile card catalogues identifying political and racial enemies of the regime, such as Freemasons, Jews, Gypsies, and genetically diseased persons. There's very little public acknowledgement of the suffering of Freemasons during the Holocaust in the UK. If, for example, you look at the BBC website, you'll find the following. Holocaust Memorial Day is an annual event commemorating all of the communities who suffered as a result of the Holocaust and Nazi persecution. Activities and events take place throughout the week, leading up to the national event throughout the UK. The Queen is the patron of the charity that organises a $500,000 event funded by the Home Office. 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and Holocaust Memorial Day was established in 1999 to create a memorial to those who lost their lives. Other victims included Slavs, Gypsies, homosexuals, disabled people, anyone of African descent, Christian pastors, Catholic priests, Jehovah's Witnesses, Russian prisoners of war, trade unionists, and any other individuals who, for whatever reason, were considered racially inferior or seen as degenerates. It's believed that a total of 15 million people died. You will here note that there is not a mention of our brothers who either face persecution or death. It's worth remembering that every Führer order in respect of the Holocaust started with the words, an order in respect of Freemasons and Jews. It's difficult to find any references to the death of Masons in the Holocaust in the media or in other publications. But the attacks and the hatred continue. David Sands, writing in the Washington Times in July 2004, said that in some countries, anti-Masonry is often related to anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This view is strongly felt in the Middle East. For example, in 1980, the Iraqi legal and penal code was changed by Saddam Hussein's ruling Ba'ath Party, making it a felony to promote or acclaim Zionist principles, including Freemasonry. The Charter of Hamas, the Islamic party governing Gaza, in Article 22, says of the Jews, they were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we've heard or hear about. With their money, they formed secret societies, such as Freemasons, Rotary Club, the Lions, and others in different parts of the world for the purpose of sabotaging societies. And as recently as 2016, the FBI foiled a plot by an Islamic extremist to attack a Masonic building in Milwaukee, United States of America. Closer to home, the threat of fascism is still a reality, with several European countries having extreme right-wing parties either gaining much more of the vote, as seen in France, Holland, Austria, Italy, Sweden, Spain, and Germany, or being involved in government, which is the case in Hungary. The threat of many of these parties being asked to form coalitions in the near future is a real threat that is very relevant today. In conclusion, brethren, we must be thankful that Hitler postponed the invasion plans for 1940, partly due to the Battle of Britain still being fought and therefore air supremacy still in the balance, and a strong Royal Navy presence aligned with the fact that as an island, we would have been much more difficult to successfully invade. Otherwise, we may well have succumbed to the same fate as many of those landlocked countries of Europe, of which the Nazi war machine unceremoniously and viciously swept through. And our own British Masonic predecessors could have faced the same persecution of their European brethren. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that had the Allies lost the Second World War, Freemasonry in Europe as we know it, and perhaps even the world, would have ceased to exist. Thank you for listening, brethren. I hope that has brought a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge to some or all of you. And I welcome your questions. Please take it easy and don't bog me down with too many.
Gary, before we go to the questions and answers, and Brian, please, if you have got any questions for Gary, please, as usual, put them in the chat. But Worshipful Brother Gary Smith, can I thank you for such a well-researched, such a moving and such an important presentation, and possibly one of the most important presentations that we've heard over the last year of our lockdown lecture, because of the enormity of the subject that you've dealt with. So on behalf of everyone here this evening and those who will watch it on YouTube, can I thank you very much, sir, for your efforts. Brian, I'm sure we do have questions, and unlike normal, I'm not being able to follow them because of the screen sharing, but if you just give me a couple of seconds, I can catch up. Michael Hearn, a booklet by Keith Flynn called Behind the Wire details the lodge meetings that took place in prison camps in World War II, including the meetings in Changi Jail.
Yeah, one of my references actually is is Keith Flynn, and he's got a book. He's got a couple of books, but one of them, English Freemasonry during the Second World War. That's a great read. So if anyone's interested in that one, that's one of the references to this talk.
Brian, as usual, I will put up a variety of stuff on the Facebook this evening, but that will include all the sources that Gary has used this evening. Tom, yes, we'll get that over to you as well. So, from Brother Aubrey Winnie, to avoid the destruction of their archives, the Grand Lodge of Hamburg sent them to Chile, where they were held in safekeeping by a German-speaking Lodge Lessing in Valparaiso. There they remained until after the war. The building was also shared by Lodge Harmony, UGLE, and Lodge Star and Thistle 519 Scottish Constitution. This building is still in use, but sadly Lodge Star and Thistle went dormant about 10 years ago. Thanks, Aubrey, for bringing that little snippet all the way from Chile.
It's in reference to that as well. This isn't in the paper, obviously, but again, it might be something that I add. United Grand Lodge asked for warrants to be sent back to them for safekeeping. So lodges were asked to make a photographic reference or draw a reference of the warrant to be used at Masonic meetings, and to send the original into UGLE, which a lot of lodges did. Some lodges took it upon themselves to hide the warrants. And I know of one lodge, which I think was in Dorset, that buried the warrant, put it in a tube and buried it. And there was only 2 members of the lodge who knew where it was. So it's a good job. It's a good job after the war. They were both still with us and they managed to get the warrant back, or else it still would have been buried. But yeah, UGLE asked for the warrants of all the lodges to be sent to them for safekeeping.
From your good friend mine, Michael Monroe, do you have a copy of the plaque listing the French deportees, and are you able to show it to us?
I have. I will send it to Mike. Mike can share it with you, Gordon, and you can perhaps share it afterwards. Yep. It is on an email. I have got it on an email somewhere, and I'm just not sure.
Yeah, that we can share that afterwards. Then Gary, we'll put it up on the Facebook page.
That's only just been brought to my light. That's something that this guy from Quarter Coronati has shared with me. So it's an image that I'm going to use in future in the presentation. But it's only just been brought to my light that this plaque exists. But Mike, I will definitely share it with you. I'll have a look after I've finished here. I'll route it out and I'll forward it over to you.
Thank you. Michael Hearn comments, the stamps, slide 6, show the Seal of Solomon and not the Star of David. And I think we've had that in the past, a confusion over what is the Star of David and what is the Seal of Solomon.
I don't express to be an expert in Royal Arch. I am a member of Royal Arch. I'm soon to go into the First Principles chair. But yeah, they're very, very similar, aren't they, the Star of David? I'm not sure exactly of the difference. Perhaps I should do as a senior Mason in the province of West Lancashire, but I don't. But yeah, I don't look at it that closely to see whether it is that. But I think it's the correlation between, and I don't think the Nazis would have done either. I think they'd have seen one and just thought it was the same as the other. So the correlation between Judaism and Freemasonry, again, it's another piece of fuel for the fire, isn't it? The fact that we use that symbol in Royal Arch.
Steve Chalmers comments, at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, French prisoners in Scotland started a prisoner of war lodge in Lanark called Les Amis Réunis dans Adversité. My French is not very good, but I think someone with French will be able to give us a translation on the Facebook page later on. Tom Edgar comments, very interesting lecture. But what's more interesting is the variation of Freemasonry during the war. Some say that the Brethren and their lodges were not touched by order of Nazis, and yet in this talk they were destroyed. And I think, Tom, from my understanding, from what others have told me over the years, I think Gary's pretty spot on with his description. Jim Reeves comments on the stamps for you, Gary. Bottom left stamp looks like it depicts a wheat sheaf.
So yes, there would be a Masonic reference there, wouldn't there? With the wheat sheaf. Yeah.
Can I list the movies on Karachi Facebook pages? Yes, Egil, I will do that later on. Rolf, Rolf Kyle's one of our German brethren who's with us. Rolf comments, I think we have to consider that the treatment of the craft in and outside Germany was a totally different story. In Germany, many Freemasons had views that matched the views of the Nazis. So yes, their property was plundered, but only in very few cases. There was violence against German Freemasons. In 1938, there even was an amnesty for all Masons who left the craft before the seizure of power. Thank you, Rolf, and I think it's much appreciated by the brethren that you feel able to comment on this as well this evening, so thank you.
Yeah, there is in the original paper that Mike sent me, some of the context of that paper survives in this paper exactly as it was, because I couldn't have put it any better. But there was a statement in there which was about Adolf Eichmann, which said that it is estimated that Eichmann ordered the death of 65,000 German Freemasons. Now, that's a big, bold statement, and one that needed definite research. From my research, it's just not true. It's on the internet, and if you search Freemasonry in the Holocaust, you'll come across this. I just don't see that it's true, because as stated in my presentation, 47,000 or more were members of the lodges that didn't actively allow Jews to be part of that anyway. And other estimations are there was 100,000 Freemasons in Germany at that time. My research puts that number closer to 70,000, but whatever, half of them, if there was 100,000, didn't accept Jews into the organization. And as that brother just pointed out, they had similar views to the Nazi party. So for Eichmann to order the death of 65,000 Freemasons in Germany, the maths just don't work. So I think you've got to correlate that statement as well over to the how many Freemasons were killed. It's a very difficult number to determine. And in my paper, I put between 70,000 and 200. It's a big gap. In all honesty, I think it's probably closer to 100,000. That said, it's still a lot of brethren who would have lost their lives, but I don't think it's as high as the 200,000. I mean, we all know that the actual official figure of how many Jews were killed is put at around 6 million now, isn't it? That's the official figure by the Holocaust Memorial Center of 6 million. But we've all heard that that number has been as high in some documentaries and things I've seen as 12 million. You know, it's very difficult to put actual numbers on these things, but in my research and my educated view on it is it was probably more like 100,000 Freemasons who were killed across Europe.
Okay, thank you, Gary. David Johnson comments, I was going to mention this book as well. Bob Cooper's book, The Red Triangle, is well worth a read and tells some unpleasant similar stories. Alan Keegan mentions, isn't it chilling that in the 1950s, the British Labour Party had openly anti-Jewish ministers in government? Reference a lecture recently on Freemasonry in Israel and Bevan. Steve, thank you for your translation. Friends reunited in adversity. Danny Morrison asks, was there a timetable for the removal of Freemasonry in the UK or a priority list for eliminating key office bearers aside from the Black Book?
There's a timetable for removal of Freemasonry in the UK. Not that I know of. The Black Book was the main source of reference for a successful invasion. So not that I know of would be the answer to that one.
Okay, and we've got two final comments, Bern, and I've got a couple of Bern who have asked if they can make a comment, and I will come to both of them. And the final question from Alan Keegan: do you know, Gary, if UGLE have raised the issue readmission of Masons on the Holocaust page? Surely a very worthy cause.
Again, I don't know. I mean, I am in contact with UGLE now because of the presentation that I gave to them as well. So I'm in contact with the publicity guy down there. So it's certainly something I could raise a question with him. But yeah, very interesting. And I agree. It's a very worthy course. If I could just make one more comment before you move to those two brethren. I usually get asked, I'm surprised I haven't tonight, but I usually get asked, it might be because it's not as big in Scotland, I don't know. But in England, a lot of brethren were the forget-me-not, and a lot around the world, and certainly in America, a lot of brethren were the forget-me-not. And I'm usually asked as to why I don't mention the forget-me-not in this talk. And is there a reason behind that? Now, again, I don't want to take anything away from the wearing of the forget-me-not. The forget-me-not to be worn to remember Masons who were killed in the war is a very, very worthwhile cause. And I would recommend that people wear them and wear them with pride. I've got one. I've got cufflinks and a pin badge. However, the legend behind the story, it is just that. It is a legend. What you've got to remember is in Germany, the forget-me-not it's symbolic, and it has been for many, many years. It dates back well before the war. I think originally, and there is German brethren on here that may be able to correct me on this, but again, my research is that it originated from a Teutonic knight who came back from the Crusades, and the Teutonic Knights were basically the German equivalent to the Knights Templars. You know, there was the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonics, and the Teutonics were Germans. And the legend has it that a German Teutonic knight returned to Germany and was walking along a riverbank with his betrothed, and he slipped and fell into the river, and the weight of his armor dragged him under. But as he was going under, he reached to the riverbank and he grabbed some flowers, which happened to be the forget-me-nots, and he yelled out forget-me-not to his betrothed, and that's how the flower got its name. Again, a legend, but a nice, wonderful, colourful story. Yeah. But because it's so symbolic in Germany, that's why the German lodges chose it as a pin to wear in the 1920s, along, you know, in between the war years. The German lodge chose it to wear as a pin badge. Years later, the Nazi Party did indeed use the same badge as a fundraiser. It was said it was used for charity. It wasn't. It was used for rearmament. But anyway, that aside, those two facts that are out there led to the creation of this legend. Now, some of it is because of the embarrassment of this collaboration between some Freemasons and the Nazis that occurred. So the embarrassment in the post-war years, this legend grew out of that to take a little bit of the impetus to get away from that. And I believe an American Mason visited Germany and he was told this legend, took it back to America, and it went viral. And that's, you know, that's where that legend's come from. It's not true. The thought that anybody would possibly walk around with a badge other than a swastika during the wartime years in Germany is you know, it's unbelievable, isn't it? So we've all heard that legend, but unfortunately my research says it's not true. But I would go on to say again, brethren, if you wear that pin badge to remember Masons who were killed in the war, carry on doing so. It's just that, you know, there's a lot of companies out there selling these things, and they give you a little postcard with this legend on, and you know, it's laughable, really.
I think, Gary, one of the reasons you didn't have any questions around that, we have had a couple of presentations on the history of Germany that explained the German rationale behind it. And again, one of those, Brian, I'm about to ask to comment, but before I come to Rolf, Norbert Schoen, you asked if you could make a comment, so please unmute yourself, Norbert, and make your comment.
Yes, thank you. When I made that comment, I didn't see that Rolf was here as well. I thought I was the only German, but first of all, I wanted to thank Gary once again for this excellent presentation and for making that. I wanted to add, and maybe Rolf will go the same way, that unfortunately in Germany at the moment, we have people who are against the coronavirus restrictions and to claim that this is all part of some kind of conspiracy as well, and you may have them in your country as well, but in Germany, of course, we're very sensitive to the whole topic of conspiracy theories, and they've actually, some of them have connected the whole coronavirus thing with a Masonic conspiracy as well. And in Germany, and I'm sure, Rolf, you have that problem in Frankfurt as well, we have to guard all synagogues 24/7 by the police, because there have also been attacks that you've probably heard on the news as well in Hanau. And we had an attack in Hamburg as well on a young man entering the synagogue. He was actually hit down with a shovel by a man who was mentally disturbed, but still, this is terrible acts. And we actually had open threats against Masonic buildings as well. I think one who is one of the activists of this anti-corona groups asked his members to enter the Logan house in Frankfurt, didn't he, Rolf, in public? So we're deeply concerned, and it's important to remind the people of what anti-Masonic conspiracy theories can do and how they destroy the freedom that we enjoy. and that is not something that is to be taken lightly. So I cannot thank you enough, Gary, for telling the story and the way you do it. German Masonic history is really complicated. You won't find many German Freemasons who understand it. And it's very, very different from English Freemasonry, because there was no Germany when Freemasonry came to Germany. We had these different states, and each king wanted to have his own Grand Lodge, and that's why it's so complicated and with their own different developments. But I thank you very much for trying to present it so well, Gary, and for you, brethren, for listening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Sean, for your comments. Brother Rolf Keel, do you want to say a final comment?
Yes, with pleasure. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. Really appreciate it. I think when it comes to the victims in Germany, Freemasons who were victims of the Nazi Party, we in Germany guess it's under 100, because, as you said, many of the German Freemasons were hardly anti-Semitic, joined the same view as the Nazi Party. We have the Grand Master of Hamburg inviting Hitler to visit the minute books of the lodges. We had letters of congratulation from the old Prussian Grand Lodges to the Nazi Party. So there was much collaboration and the hope to survive in the new system. So really there wasn't, as I said, the property was seized, but there wasn't really much violence against the Freemasons in Germany. And the Freemasons that were killed in Germany, we have to question again, were they killed because they were Freemasons, or were they killed because they were leaders of labor unions or politicians or human rights activists or something like that? So to sum this up, I really don't think much more than probably 100 were killed in Germany for being Freemasons.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Rolf, and I thank you for your comments, and also Norbert's comments, and I take them completely on board. I think I do touch upon in the paper that German Freemasons were obviously, they weren't allowed to hold position in the civil service, etc. But Hitler obviously changed that because he realized that these people, you know, they were potential leaders, and to make the Nazi regime powerful, it needed these people. You know, and the feeling at the time, as you've rightly said, was that anti-Semitism was quite rife within the Masonic organization. I clear away from going into too much detail because it is an uncomfortable thing. I do mention it because it needs mentioning, but I don't go into great detail with it. But what I do go into detail at the end is as well, Rolf and Norbert, is that the rise of, and Norbert has touched on this with the attacks that are happening now and this conspiracy thing that's happening, the rise of fascist parties across Europe now, it's quite worrying. But I think my most recent research, is there a political party now that's called Für Deutschland in Germany at the moment?
Well, there is an alternative for Germany, alternative for Deutschland, which is very right-wing. Then we have some other very right-wing parties as well, and they all use Freemasonry as a scapegoat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is indeed, as Norbert pointed out, this is indeed very dangerous situation right now. So we are all aware that we have to secure our gates, and we have to secure our west gate of the temples, and look who's tried to join us, because this is one thing we've seen when we look in German Masonic history as well. The brethren at this time openly invited guys with very right-wing views into the craft, and so the craft was really pushed in a way in the Völkisch movement.
Yeah, and again, as I say, I do touch on that at the end. With the rise of right-wing across Europe, you've got, I mean, you only have to look at France as well with the Front National, you
Absolutely.
know. Marine Le Pen.
At the sake of bringing this very interesting discussion to an end, we do try not to get involved in the political situation across our own country in Europe. And albeit it's so interesting, and it's a subject that can be debated all night, I think for this audience and for what we're trying to do at the lockdown lecture, I think we need to just pull that together. And how I will do that, Gary, is once again thanking you so much for coming along to the Lodge Hope of Karachi this evening and giving us this very moving piece that you've researched from a variety of sources and presented it in a very powerful and emotive way. So Gary Smith, thank you, sir, for coming along, and we look forward to maybe being in your company post lockdown cessations. Brian, with that, a couple of intimations. Tomorrow evening we have the Grand Lodge of Scotland History and Heritage presentation, The View from Over Here, and it'll be from the District Grand Master of the District Grand Lodge of East Africa. So I'm sure I'll see many of you tomorrow evening at that. And for those of you that have been getting very confused or getting very upset with me about my teaser clues over the last week, I'll give you a sort of an insight into a couple of them. When I put up the bottles of Buckfast, that wasn't to tease all you brethren from the West that that's your normal drink in the evening. That was a reference to Buckfast Abbey, which was one of the locations of the programme I was referring to. The other location for that was New Lanark Mills. And if you've not already guessed, Brian, it was the Antiques Roadshow. A variety of the clues showed Masonic artefacts that had been on the Antiques Roadshow over the year. And I'm not saying the past Grand Master Mason Marcus Humphrey is an antique, but certainly his car that he demonstrated on it is an antique. The reference to China, Brian, was the reference to the cannons that make the brass for the Victoria Cross. And the final one was the main presenter this evening of the Antiques Roadshow. She's not coming, Brian, so but we do have coming along next week worshipful brother Mark Smith, who is the Militaria and Medals expert. Mark is the Provincial Grand Orator for the Provincial Grand Lodge of Essex, and he has agreed to come along as our sort of celebrity in inverted commas, because I don't think he would like himself to be seen as a celebrity. He's there as an antiques and military expert, and he will be coming along next week to talk to us about the story of Valor and the one that he presents, and he will probably touch on his career on the Antiques Roadshow. So hopefully, Brian, our guest speaker next week is someone that will make our anniversary meeting somewhat special. But who will really make it special is each and every one of you coming along and joining us. With that, Brian, please unmute yourself, say your thank yous to worshipful brother Gary Smith.
Well done, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Yes, well done, Gary. Super talk. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on, Gary. Might see you at the Peace Lodge next.
Job well done.
Catch up with you later. Well done, guys. Well done, Gary. Thank you very much.
Most enjoyable, Gary. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Gary.
That was
Thank you.
worthy of a second listing. It was super.
Thank you, Alex.
Absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Gary. Really enjoyed that. Very enlightening. Thank you.
And keep safe, everybody. Keep safe and well.
And you're bed now, bro.
Yes, and you too as well.
And you. Yeah.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to give you 5.
Thanks, Gary. Very, very, very well done.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it very much.
And for
Thanks,
Brian.
Gordon. Thanks for all your help.
Well done,
Thank you.
Great talks. Thank you.
Well
Thank you,
done,
Gordon.
Gary. An excellent lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
And 3, Brian.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Claudia. And 2.
Thank you, Gary. Excellent. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Thanks, Nobby.
And 1, and final thank you, Gary. On behalf of myself and the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, thank you so much, sir. Enjoy your Masonic career.
And give me a bell, Gordon.
I will do, Gary.